Now I'm going to try something tonight. I usually don't do a share screen, but I'm going to try a share screen because we're going to talk about engines. And Dick Moritz is on. So Dick, I've told Dick he can just break in anytime to correct me or add to it or you know, whatever as far as engine building. But I've got some notes here. So let me try to see if I can share my screen. Oh my gosh, there's too much stuff on here. There we go, share. All right, so this is my my view on an engine. People say, oh, I gotta have my engine rebuilt, it's tired. Tired? What does tired mean? Nothing. So what's the condition of the engine? You can have water leaks, you can have compression issues, you can have low oil pressure, you can have high oil consumption, or you can have a camshaft that isn't pushing the valves far enough open. Any one of these you just fix in place. Any two of them you might fix in place. Three of them you might fix in place. But sometimes there's so much going on that it just makes more sense to pull the whole engine out and rebuild it or have it rebuilt. So these are the 5 factors. So let's just go through these real quickly. So water leaks, the heater control valve leaks right on top of the distributor, so you know when it's leaking. That's handy. Water pump, you can fix that. Freeze plugs, oh my gosh, when those pop out, it's such a bugger, but they can leak. And you can also have a water leak between the block and the head, which is really odd, really odd. Compression. The cylinder should, can you see these? Can you see these pages as I'm pulling them up? I see people nodding.
Yes, yes,
Yep.
Okay.
yes.
So the compression, does it matter if it's 105 or 180? Well, it's an indication of what the static compression ratio is, but more importantly, they want to be the same. So within 10% of each other. If they're not, it might be a faulty valve, might be faulty rings, might be a blown head gasket. Some people are keen on putting oil down inside the cylinder to find out whether it's rings or valves. But if it's rings or valves, you got to take the head off. So there's no point spending any time doing that. Just take the head off and you can tell more easily from there. Oil pressure. Now, generally speaking, running down the road, 75 pounds, around there, that's just great. That's T-types, that's MGBs, midgets, the whole bunch, not MGCs, that's a smaller figure. But if you don't have that, and again, it doesn't matter what it idles at. It can idle at 5 pounds. In August, when it's like really hot outside and the engine's ticking over at 600 RPM, as long as when you hit the throttle and it pops right up, I mean, it pops up instantly to the blow off, then you're okay. So why is oil pressure low going down the, you got 50 pounds, you got 45 pounds running down the road. It might be you've got diluted oil. You might have a faulty oil pressure relief valve spring, hardly ever. Worn out oil pump or worn bearings, that would be the more common things. So you can fix lots of these right in place. Oil consumption, that's one of the biggies. So it's either leaking oil or it's burning oil. If it's leaking oil, there's a pressure leak, drip, 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 like a hole in your artery on your body. That's no good at all because there are only so many drops in a gallon of oil. Then you can have what I call passive leaks around the timing cover, around the front tappet inspection cover or something where it drools out. You can find this by buying oil dye at Napa and putting it in the engine and putting a black light on it after you've driven it around for a little bit, and it'll fluoresce like an iridescent banana. You can tell exactly where the oil leak is coming from. Or you've got oil burning, and that can be because the engine's pressurized because someone screwed up the way that the engine ought to vent. Might be valve guides, there might be the rings. But it's always the rings, with exceptions. I just talked to a guy yesterday, who said, oh boy, when he slows down and then hits the throttle, it's a great big burst of smoke out of the back of the car. That's valve guides, textbook case. So, condition of the camshaft. Now, you can only tell this, well, if you can see this when the engine's running, that one of the valves isn't opening up as much as the other, oh my gosh, then you have no ability to run well at higher speed. The condition of the cam won't make any difference as far as idle. It won't make any difference as far as compression. It's still closing. It's just not opening far enough. So some of the cams that we've seen, oh my gosh, they're round, like a 77 MGB for whatever reason. Lots of the cams that year were faulty. And they, instead of having an egg-shaped lobe on them, oh my gosh. So here's my little formula for building an engine. And it's a simple ratio. Dollars equal power times reliability times efficiency all over emissions. So if you keep dollars static and increase power, then either reliability is going to go down, efficiency is going to go down, or emissions are going to go up. Now with dollars, you can do anything. Well, to a point, you know. So anyway, dollars it's what kind of engine do you want? That's the question. And one of the next questions is, who builds the engine? You can abandon the whole project, send it to Dick, and I don't know. He'll explain how he takes engines in and creates them and so forth. And you just don't do anything. You just agree to sign a charge card slip, you know. Or you can do it yourself. Now, very few people have got a crank grinding machine in their you know, a cylinder boring machine in the garage. So you end up having to get some of the work done at a machine shop. The crank grinding and the surfacing of the head and valve job and stuff like that. And then you go ahead and put it together. Or it's pretty common. We used to deal with a lot of sort of hybrids, and that is that the customer would get the engine as far as the cranks in it, you know, the cranks in it, the pistons are in it, and the block's already been all cleaned up and everything like that, everything's set to go, and then they go ahead and do the final assembly. I want to just say a few words about running in a new engine. You want to use high zinc break-in oil. Run it, this is the way that we used to do it. Run it at 2,500 RPM for 20 to 30 minutes. Don't walk away, stand there. Might be boring, but just stand there and watch, you know, just monitor everything. Make sure it's not getting too hot or the oil pressure too low or something. And then when you're all done, retorque the head and readjust the valves. And then at 500 miles, change the oil and filter, and put in just a normal high zinc oil, not the break-in oil. So we've got some clearances, and we can come back to this when Dick and I start talking. But there's a lot of end floats and stuff in the engine, and the MGB rings. The factory workshop manual gives a much tighter figure than 18 thousandths, but my machine shop said, oh my gosh, with the higher temperatures of the newer gasoline, you've got to allow for expansion of the cast iron rings. So he instructed us all to look for 18 thousandths on an MGB engine. And then the end float on the cam, the crank, distributor drive gear, flywheel run out, all 2 to 3 thousandths. And when you get that down to half a thousandth and everything's all balanced, then you can rev the engine up faster. That's that reliability part of it. Here's some engine building notes that I just put together quickly. There are these things called speedy sleeves. You can use them on the front pulley where the seal has worn a groove in the front pulley, or you can use it on the back of the crank where the seal's rubbed a groove into the crankshaft. You go, how would a rubber seal cut a groove into a steel crankshaft? Because the rubber seal holds dirt, and that dirt is what acts as the abrasive. So use cast iron valve guides, the phosphor bronze ones, whatever those are. Those things swell and they'll grab and gall the valves. Use umbrella oil seals. There's a thin cork gasket for the front tappet inspection cover. The gaskets that you get might have too thick cork gaskets, or might have too thick red rubber gaskets. If you put that on the front front tappet inspection cover, it is sure to leak. We always used gasket glue between the gasket and the sump, the timing cover, and the valve cover, and then used grease on the other side of that gasket between the sump, the timing cover, the valve cover, and the block. So that when you have to take the sump back off, because you've made some dreadful error, the sump comes right back off again. You don't have to scrape away the old gasket. We always used grease on the water pump bolts, the thermostat studs, the heater control valve, all those gaskets, all those studs. And you want to put grease on the seals and the running surfaces, like when you put the seal on the back of the crank or on the timing cover. You don't want it to start up dry. Ensure the correct oil pump gasket. 1 out of 10 people who build an engine, a B5 main engine, get the 3 main pump gasket in there. It's really common. It's really silly that they don't make a better gasket, because no block uses the original style of pump that it was designed for. Another thing that I get a lot of calls on is about the timing. And remember that the crankshaft turns twice for every time the camshaft turns once. So you've got these dots to line up your timing gears. And when those dots are adjacent, and you put the whole cam back together and put it into place, it's firing on number 4, not number 1. You would think number 1, of course, but it's not. Use JB weld on the outside of the freeze plugs so they don't pop out. Get oil pressure before you start that engine. That should have been up in that other section, but spin the engine over until you've got oil pressure on your gauge before you fire it up, to reduce the chance of any damage. So anyway, I'm going to stop my screen share, but I can come back to it. So anyway, so I'm interested in I'm going to hit mute all just to get rid of some background noise. And I'm interested in taking comments or questions or anything at all, or Dick can bring those in too. So anybody can break in anytime and ask any question.
Hey, John, it's Dick here. Can I offer some comments on your list you just went through?
Sure.
Great. Could you put that back up on the screen, start at the top?
Absolutely. I'm an old dog. This is a new trick tonight. So.
Okay.
No, that's probably not it. Here, that's it. Okay, whereabouts?
Start at the beginning of your list, if you would, please.
Sure.
Great. So here on this panel, I'd like to just add a couple of things in terms of diagnostics, and that is in terms of compression in particular. I would say certainly a compression test is always a good idea because it's quick and easy, and you can compare compression. Certainly, as John suggests, cylinders should be within 10% of each other. If you find one cylinder that's especially low, or 2 cylinders, adjacent cylinders that are especially low, then you'll at least have some good idea of where to look. And often if there are 2 cylinders that are adjacent that both share lower compression, then you might very well find or suspect a blown head gasket between those 2 adjacent cylinders. So certainly a compression test can't hurt. Also, I've found a cylinder leak down test to be a pretty useful diagnostic tool. And cylinder leak down test is a device where you actually apply compressed air to each cylinder in turn, and you watch the gauge to see if there's pressure lost as the gauge goes down, and also to listen and see if you can hear where the pressure is being lost. And the rule of thumb is, if you hear it coming out the tailpipe, then you suspect a bad exhaust valve. If you hear it coming out of the carburetor and air cleaner, then you suspect a bad intake valve. And if you hear the pressure being lost through the oil filler cap, then that suggests pressure loss past the piston rings down into the sump area. So it's a pretty helpful tool, not necessarily 100% definitive, but pretty helpful in going through that. John, could you go back up to the top again, please? Sure. One other thing I wanted to mention on this particular panel, when John talks about the condition of the cam and 1977 cams, and one of the things that I've noticed in particular, because I rebuild 2 or 3 MGB engines a month these days, and one of the things that I've noticed is, for some reason that I'll never understand, it seems like the third cam lobe from the front, which would be the intake lobe for cylinder number 2, that seems to be the lobe that is most often worn and worn the worst and worn before the others are. So if you're pulling the rocker cover off and you're either running the engine with the cover off or turning the engine by hand with the rocker cover off, that would be a good place to look first, would be the third rocker arm from the front of the engine, the intake for cylinder number 2, because there's a good chance that that lobe is worn. Also, I'll just pass this along in case anybody's taking notes. If you have a camshaft that's out of the car, and if you're interested in assessing the condition of the cam lobe, the spec for a stock cam lobe, if you measure like with a digital caliper from the heel to the toe of the lobe, the nominal dimension there is about 1.380 inches, 1.380 from the heel to the toe of the camshaft lobe. So that's something that you can use. Now that won't apply if the cam has been reground. It also won't apply to a performance cam, but that's the figure for the stock cam. Don, can we go back up again, please? Thanks. Next panel, please. Water leaks. The only thing I would add there when John talks about freeze plugs, that they are a bugger to replace with the engine in place. One of the things that 2 comments I'll make. Number 1, there's a Dorman bolt-in copper-colored freeze plug that seems to work pretty well on our cars. Our cars use an oddball size freeze plug. It's 1 5/8 inches, and that's not as common as some of your small block Fords and Chevys, although it is the same size as used in a lot of Mopar V8s, Chrysler V8s, and I think 6 cylinders as well. But in any case, these are self-expanding. They're not the rubber plugs, but rather they're a copper-colored metal plug that you fit in the hole, down in against the shoulder in the engine block, and then tighten a hex nut with a wrench, and it's self-expanding, and it seems to seal pretty good. I know we always take a box full of them to the racetrack, because if we blow a freeze plug at the racetrack and we have to do a quick fix, then that's a good quick fix. And on this topic of freeze plugs, I'd also say that the plug on the back of the block is a real mess, because it's shrouded by the engine back plate. And so for those of you who may not be familiar with it, there's a kind of a belt and suspenders approach to that, and it's called a Betson bolt, B-E-T-S-O-N, Betson bolt, and basically it uses a bolt and a nut and a washer as a mechanical device through a hole in the back plate that you put on as a preventive measure, whereby you actually screw this bolt in, and you can Google Betson bolt, but we basically screw the bolt in, and what it does is the bolt actually pushes against that freeze plug in the back of the block to hold it in place to keep it from popping out. So it's a belt and suspenders kind of a thing. So that's useful with freeze plugs, and particularly the one in the back of the block. John, can you go to the next panel? And John, if I'm talking too much, please cut me off here.
No, you're doing it. No, I'm the one who's usually doing all the talking. This is nice.
Okay.
Dick, I have a quick question. John Sally here. You just built my engine a couple months ago.
Hi, John.
Hey, so are these Betson bolts? Do you have to drill the hole and tap it, or are they already?
No, I'll try and give you a quick visual here. Pretend my hand is the back plate on the engine, and the freeze plug and the block are over on this side. What you do is you get a bolt and you put it through the existing hole in the back plate. And then you fit, I guess, a washer and a nut on the inside, and then hold the nut. And as you hold the nut, the bolt screws in against the freeze plug in the back, and the nut holds the bolt from turning and coming loose. So
Okay.
you're actually, in effect, it's kind of like you were putting threads in the back plate. If you could thread the back plate, then you could just screw a bolt right into that until it pushed up against the freeze
Right.
plug. But since we can't put threads in the back plate, we put a nut and washer on the inside to give the
Okay.
bolt something to push against, and then the bolt just pushes against the freeze plug.
Is there already a hole in the back plate? or
Yes,
does
there
that-
is. There's a hole right in line
Okay,
with that rear freeze plug.
okay, great, thank you.
Yeah,
Can I
sure.
ask a question?
Sure. Who's that?
It's Gary Greenspan, Victoria. Hi, Dick. Hi, John.
Hi, Gary. Nice to talk to you again.
Thank you. I've got a 1980 with 100,000 miles on it. Everything's running perfectly, but for years I've heard about this freeze plug. Do I need to worry about this at this point?
In my, I'd ask John for his opinion. In my opinion, if it's held that long, it's probably going to hold indefinitely. John, what do you think?
Yep, there's no, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think you're just fine.
I thank you very much. Relief of my mind today. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay,
Okay.
okay,
John,
Gary.
can we go to the next panel?
Absolutely. So I've got this one organized because I always suggest that you do repairs from the easiest, simplest, cheapest to the most expensive. So if you got bad oil pressure, the first thing you do is change the oil. And then you change the oil pressure relief valve, even though that hardly ever makes a difference. But it's on the outside and it's only a couple of bucks. It ruins your wrist doing it in place. But it just, before you do it, and just, you know, maybe once in a blue moon, it may catch the problem. Anyway, that's all I gotta say.
Sure. And I'll just add to John's earlier comment about the oil pump gasket. All the gasket sets come with 2 oil pump gaskets for where you mount the pump to the block. One of them is for 3 main and one of them is for 5 main, and they're not at all intuitive. And so I would urge you to look for a witness mark on the block, look at the oil pump, look at a drawing online. And what I do when I'm working on a motor, as many as I've done, and I've done an awful lot of these motors, as many as I've done, whatever motor I'm working on, whether it's a 3 main or a 5 main, the first thing I do is I take out the 2 oil pump gaskets, I identify the one I'm going to use, and I tear the other one in half. That way I can't possibly put the wrong one in when I'm doing it. But it is not intuitive, and if you put the wrong gasket in, then you're not going to have oil pressure no matter what. John, can we go to a next panel, please?
John, I have a question before you leave.
Yeah,
Yeah, when you were talking about oil pressure originally, I think you commented on the MGC oil pressure not being as high. Is that true?
yeah. The pump is bigger, but I think it's so hard to tell because they've all got those electric oil pressure gauges and none of those read correctly. I mean, I use these powerful words like always and never and so forth, and it's with some humor, but it's almost always true. I would think down around 45 pounds. What do you think, Dick?
I would agree with that. And plus with a 6-cylinder, don't forget that the more cylinders you have, the more connecting rod bearing pairs and journals you have. So you have more places for the oil pressure to ooze out.
So
Okay.
I don't know. I just don't know for sure what that oil pressure figure ought to be on a C. I really don't. I'm guessing 45. I know on a V8 it's down around 45. But
Okay, thanks for the clarification, John.
hey, you're welcome.
John, Alan
Yes.
here. Good evening. So I have a C. I switched my oil pressure gauge to a mechanical gauge.
Yeah, what do you have on that now, Alan?
So I'm getting over 55, maybe even
Great.
closer to 60.
Well,
And on idle, it's probably 15 to 25. But I'm using like a 1974 mechanical gauge that I'm running just like the way an MGB would do it.
good.
And if anybody wants to know, there's a fitting that you can buy That's actually a TR6 fitting that goes into the block in the same place that the electric sender unit would go.
Okay.
When you come up, I'll show it to you on my car.
Hey, so yeah, that's the big action. Next week, I just got back from GT47, the NAMGAR meet in Colorado Springs this past, when did I get back? Saturday, Friday. And then next week, Sunday, I drive up to Canada, assuming that my Travel Can app works. Anyway, that I'll get through the border and there's a big, huge meet in northeast of Toronto in Peterborough. So Alan's going to be up there. Yep. And I'm going to talk about building engines some more up there. So Dick, you still want this panel up?
You sure? Next panel, please.
Let me make a comment about this, and then at 100,000 miles, like what Gary Greenspoon had, at 100,000 miles, I used to suggest to my customers that we drop the sump, replace all 4 rod bearings, 3 of the 5 mains, because you can't get the front or rear, just can't reach them, but change 3 of the 5 mains, all the rods, and the oil pump. And man, you can pop that oil pressure right back up again. And sometimes you take the bearings out and the wear on them is just beautiful. I mean, it just here and there you see just a faint little bit of copper, but it's all consistent. The wear is nice and consistent. And you can pop that back up without taking the whole engine out of the car. Dicey, but you can do it. Okay,
I agree completely with that.
oil consumption.
Sure, I'd just add a couple of things to that. Number one, I'd certainly agree with John with your assessment on valve guides. A lot of people say, oh, well, I want to get my head redone with bronze valve guides. And there might be, in my estimation, a little bit less friction with the bronze than with cast iron. It's minimal, probably on a race head, probably not a bad idea. On a street engine, not at all necessary, and very important. If anybody opts to have their cylinder head redone with bronze valve guides, the bronze silicon valve guides have a coefficient of thermal expansion greater than the cast iron. And because of that, if you don't allow extra stem to guide clearance with the bronze valve guides, they will get hot and seize up on the valve stems. So the number is, if anybody's going to send a head out to have bronze valve guides put in, you must have at least 3,000 stem to guide clearance. Anything less than that, the guide will expand and bind up. John, go ahead.
We used to use 2,000s as our go-to, and that's 4 times as great as the workshop manual calls, which is half a thousandths between the cast iron guides. So the valves end up, they don't wobble much, but they do wobble. But those umbrella oil seals keep all the oil off the valve stem. So
yes, and the only other thing, is there a question out there? Okay, the only other thing I'd add is that I have no confidence at all in the stock replacement valve stem seals, which are those little O-rings. In my experience, they get hot, they get wet with oil, and they last about 20 minutes before they crumble and don't do a very good job. So either the umbrella seals or the positive type valve stem seals that actually snap onto the top of the valve guide. And sometimes you have to have the top of the valve guide machined so that the positive type valve stem seal will actually snap onto the top of the guide. It does provide a very nice wiping action while still leaving enough oil flow to lubricate the stem and guide. Okay, John, next panel, if you don't mind.
I've discovered the lift on the cam when you're putting a dial indicator on the top, that the factory workshop manual says the lift is 0.250, but it's not, it's 0.265 on a stock cam. And so, if you got 4 lobes at 265 and a couple of them at 260 and one at, 220, it's like, okay, game's up. So the camshaft guys who are keen to sell cams say that a variation of more than 10 thousandths is a reason enough to get another cam. Well, it depends how you're driving the car, but one of the steps in our tune-up that I developed over a long period, doing this all the time, was to start the car up with, after you're done adjusting the valves and torquing the head and adjusting the valves and everything, you have still have the valve cover off, and you start it up, and you just put your chin on the front fender and just look from one valve to the next. You can't tell a 10,000ths of an inch, and besides, the rocker arm ratio is about 1.5 to 1. So if there was a 10,000ths gone on the cam, that would only end up being about 15,000ths out at the end of the rocker where it's striking the valve, and you're not going to see 15,000. So if you can see anything, the camshaft is, to use the common breakfast expression, toast. So.
Hey, John, are all the cams the same lift, the exhaust and the
No.
intake?
No, they're, Dick probably knows a whole lot more about them than I do. I do have a list of cams. I showed it to Dick yesterday when we were practicing, and it's like 2 full pages of camshafts, and sometimes the exhaust and inlet lifts are different. Sometimes they're 265, sometimes they're 290. There's a lot of different ways to get the valves to open up farther. One is to have greater lift on the cam. The other one's to have offset rocker arms. Anyway, it's no, they're not all the same. But you're measuring on your cam. You're measuring from one lobe to another. So
The exhaust and the intake would be the same on a stock cam?
yes, they would. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, John, next panel, if you would.
Oh, here we go. This is fun.
I agree with all of that. And then I don't have anything to add. It's like, you pay money, and like everything else in life, there are trade-offs. And that's what we talk about with performance engine builds too. There are always some trade-offs, and they involve all of these particular factors here. And maybe in a couple minutes, John and I will talk about some things here, and then maybe if we like, then we can get past these routine engine parameters and procedures, and then maybe talk a little bit about performance engines after that, if you like.
Sure.
So,
Well, I tell people that that power equals torque times RPM. RPM is free. That's your foot. But the torque, that's important. And when you start pushing the engine up into that area that on most everybody's tachometer is orange, like warning, and red, don't go there. You can make your engine so you can run it up in those areas, but that's that reliability part. And to get up there, you've got to get the dollars up. So.
indeed. I just add 2 things to that. One is, if you're ever looking at a dyno sheet, you'll find that for reasons that I can't explain here today, the horsepower and torque curves always meet at the same engine speed, 5250, and there's a numerical reason for that, and you can Google it and look it up on the internet, but that always happens. And the other thing I would say is that in racing, we kind of have a saying when people say, well, I don't understand what's the difference between horsepower and torque. And in racing, we say, well, horsepower is how fast you're going when you hit the wall, and torque is how far you push the wall back. Anyway, you want to go to the next panel for me, John? I won't add to that. Next panel, please. I agree with all of that. Next panel, please. Here, I'll just mention that with piston rings in general, the industry rule of thumb is to have at least 0.004 of piston ring end gap for every inch of bore. So for instance, with our engines, standard bore on an MGB engine is 3/160. 3.160. So that's a little over 3 inches. So 4 thousandths end gap per inch means we're looking at an absolute minimum of about 14 thousandths end gap. Now, I have to say this, I was blessed to handle all the technical writing for perfect circle piston rings and many other automotive clients. That was my career, was technical automotive writing for auto parts companies. And so I had the pleasure and the good fortune to do all the technical writing for perfect circle piston rings for about 30 years. And I got to meet with the engineers and I learned an awful lot. And one of the things that I learned was what's important about piston ring end gap is minimum end gap, because the piston rings get hot and expand when the engine's running. And what we don't want is, we don't want the ring to expand so much that the end gaps butt. Because if they butt, then you're going to cause damage. The rings are going to break and cause collateral damage. So we want a minimum end gap, whether it's 14 thousandths or 16 thousandths, or as John suggests, 18 thousandths. One of the other things I learned was that maximum end gap is not particularly critical or important. And that's because in a street engine, we have multiple piston rings. The end gaps are practically never, ever perfectly aligned with each other. And if they are perfectly aligned with each other, the chance of combustion gases getting past 2 or 3 or 4 compression rings all at the same time is about nil because of the speed of the combustion event. So we're not worried about maximum end gap. I would, although I always like to find end gap in that 14 to 16, maybe 18 thousandths range. If it were 20 or 22, I wouldn't be concerned, and I wouldn't send the piston rings back for another set, and I wouldn't be concerned about that. I'd offer a couple of other comments on piston rings also. First of all, piston rings often have a top and a bottom. I know with Grant piston rings, for instance, they're actually imprinted with the word top. Other piston rings, like Hastings piston rings, will have a dot to identify the top. Some piston rings don't have a top and a bottom. Usually it's the top ring that has a top and a bottom, the second compression ring sometimes. And there are reasons for that. For instance, it's very common for a top compression ring to have an inside bevel on the inside top of the piston ring. And the purpose of that bevel is to allow combustion gases to come down, migrate in over the top piston ring, past that bevel and down and get in and actually push the piston ring out from behind. And that increases the piston ring to cylinder wall seal. And also in newer engines and in racing engines, there are many different piston ring cross-section shapes, not just an inside top bevel, but sometimes there's a twist, an actual twist to the ring. There's a positive twist and a negative twist. There's actually a piston ring called a taper hook groove, where the outside edge of the piston ring is actually shaped like this to actually scrape oil down off the cylinder wall. None of that applies to our engines, but the moral of this story is to draw your attention to the fact that most compression rings have a top and a bottom and are marked. So read the instruction sheet that comes with the rings. Also, where the ring fits into the piston, there's the side clearance, which is actually the top to bottom clearance, and that spec is about 1/1000th for pretty much all conventional street engines. So you want to make sure there's at least 1/1000th top to bottom clearance. And one last thing on piston rings, and that is whether you're working with new pistons, or if you're putting new pistons on new rings on used pistons, which is sometimes possible. I always suggest taking the piston ring backwards and putting it into the groove and rolling it around the whole circumference of the groove. Because if the top of the piston has been dinged or damaged such that the piston ring groove in the piston is pinched down, the ring can actually bind there. So if you put the ring in backwards and roll it around the outside of the groove, you will feel if there's a tight spot, and then you can decide how to deal with that. John, anything to add there?
No, hey, I used to take old piston rings and grind the end of them down and hold them in a rag and walk them around the outside of the piston, you know. Oh my gosh, scraping out all the carbon.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Okay, can we go to the next panel?
That thin cork gasket on the front tappet inspection cover, boy, that's, oh my gosh.
Yep. And on the cork gaskets, I also have found great success using a Permatex product called The Right Stuff as a gasket sealant. It's black. It's about the consistency of toothpaste. I really like it because it seals really well. The downside to that, the only downside to that I found is that it seals so well that it's difficult to disassemble. So it sticks really well and you have to do some scraping. But on the other hand, if you don't plan on taking it apart, it's a great gasket sealant. I think that's all I have on this panel. Get oil pressure before starting the engine. Let me just say there that it's really important when you're doing engine work to use the proper assembly lubricants for specific tasks. I use 4 or 5 different assembly lubes when I build an engine. I use an engine bearing lubricant on the big end bearings. I use engine oil on the pistons and rings. I use a task-specific lubricant for the cam lobes and lifters because the contact there is a very fine point, and that takes an extreme pressure lubricant. And I use white lithium grease on, for instance, the gear teeth on the camshaft where it meets the oil pump drive gear and also the distributor drive gear. So if you use all of the proper assembly lubricants, then while you're cranking the engine with the spark plugs out before firing it up the first time, you'll have plenty of protection. And just one other thing, because I was speaking with a fellow about this yesterday, and that is that if your car is fitted with an oil cooler, a reminder that the pathway for the oil coming from the oil pump is out the very fat hose behind the distributor at the very back of the block. It comes through that fat hose. If you have an oil cooler, it goes through the oil cooler, back from the oil cooler, then to the oil filter, and only then to the main oil gallery where the oil pressure gauge is connected. So you have to fill the oil cooler and fill the oil filter before you're going to see oil on the gauge and oil at the bearings. So just be aware of that, because cranking the engine with the spark plugs out always takes a whole lot longer than you would ever expect it to. And as John says, end.
End. Here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Let me find my share screen. No, that's not what I want to do. Stop share. There we go. Okay. All right. So anyway, we're eager to. Dick and I have talked for almost an hour, you know, and not let anybody else except a couple of people come in. So I'm eager to have, before I hit the chat section, which I will, well, here, Alan Vinegar, I have a question about adjusting the timing chain on the car by 1 tooth, but that's kind of an odd thing to have to do. What are you doing, Alan?
Okay, this is a question for a club member, not for me.
Oh,
He
yeah.
He couldn't attend tonight. So his car was running crappy. He had to do, he had a head gasket go, so we put a new head gasket in, and then he couldn't get the car to run well. And he also had trouble getting the ignition timing set. So eventually he took it to one of our local shops who knows their stuff, and they got it to run again. They had to set the distributor at 41 degrees before top dead center. I don't know at what RPM. doesn't make sense to me. But the mechanic there said that, by the way, your timing chain is off by 1 tooth. Whoever built this engine made a mistake, a small mistake. The engine does run, but it's just off a little bit. And so I said to him, from what I know, that can be done on car. Take the rad out, take the pulley off, the crank pulley, and take the timing chain cover off, take the chain tensioner off, take the cam pulley off, and move the chain in whatever direction it needs to be moved.
You always end up moving it the wrong way.
Well, so can you walk me through that on the Zoom here a little bit?
Okay, there is a quick test to see if the timing is so odd to have the timing chain off by a tooth, because the car it doesn't run or runs like shit if it's off by 1 tooth. It's so, maybe it is, but if you set the number 1 inlet valve, it's 60 thousandths, and roll the engine over, take a piece of notebook paper and put that between the rocker and the adjuster, between the rocker and the valve, on that number 1 inlet, and just turn it over until it bites the paper. You should be around real close, within a couple of degrees of top dead center. So that's it's in the MGA workshop manual. If he's got some exotic cam, it may not work like that, but that's one way. I just can't believe that's off. What's your experience with being off a whole tooth, Jack?
Yeah, I don't believe it. I don't think the engine would run hardly at all. I believe that you can also check that by bringing number 1 to top dead center in firing position, which means on its compression stroke, and certainly both rocker arms should be loose at that point. And I believe if the cam is off by a tooth, I believe one of the rocker arms will not be loose. So I think that's one check. The other thing I'd suggest is, it's very rare. It's not nearly as common as you read on the internet, but it is possible that the harmonic balancer, the outer ring, has moved on the rubber relative to the inner hub. And if that's the case, then the timing scribe mark on the balancer may not be true to 0 top dead center. So the first thing I would do would be to take number 1 spark plug out and put a straw or toothbrush or something soft and plastic in the hole, and turn the engine until the piston is at top dead center, as close as you can determine it, and then look down at the balancer to see if the timing mark on the balancer aligns with the 0 degree mark on the timing scale on the timing cover, because that, if not, then that could lead to awkward readings on the ignition timing, not cam timing, but ignition timing. So if the ignition timing is at like 45 degrees, I'd suspect that this could possibly be one of those rare instances where the harmonic balancer has actually spun and is not telling you the truth about 0 degrees. The other thing I would mention, and I'll mention this because one time cost me a very expensive race engine head on my race car, and that is, it's possible for timing lights, inductive timing lights, to develop an internal electronic error. And I had that happen to me, and I set the timing where I always set it on my race car to exactly where the timing light suggested, and it was way over advanced, and it ended up cracking a race cylinder head. So I would suggest, if there's a question about ignition timing, always cross-check with another timing light just to be sure.
Great advice, Dick. Yeah, I haven't seen the car. It was just one of my club members asked the question, and I tried to give him the best advice, but he took it to a shop. They got it running. He said it runs smoothly, but the timing number is off, which makes
it couldn't run smoothly if it was off by a tooth.
Yeah. So I think harmonic balancer for sure. Good suggestion. Love it. Thank you very much.
All right, let's see. Before I get to Ben Andrews, who's got a question about the new and improved fuel sending units, the new parts, right? I'm eager to take any question anybody can break in and ask about engines.
John,
Yes.
it sounds to me like most of what y'all have been describing is rebuilding MGB motors.
Yeah, missing that Zoom thing. I'll be out.
I
Hey,
have,
Chris, how you doing?
as you know, a TD, an A, and a B. Do you?
Judd, I got to hit mute all because I got some background here. So just unmute yourself again and let's go.
Okay, just wondered if there were any significant differences if you were doing an XPAG or an MGA 1622, or is a motor?
Well, the 1622 takes that other oil, the other oil pressure gasket. That's about it. Those engines are all. I mean, when you look at the improvement in the engines from 1954, where they got like 5 rings on them, or like early MGBs have got 5 rings, like 5 rings, I think 3 compression, 4 compression, and 1 oil scraper. It's just overkill. The amount of energy necessary to run those engines is dramatic. And by the time you get to 1980, they're so lightweight. The rods, the pistons, everything except the bells and except the counterweights on the crankshaft, which are the size of Mount Everest. I don't quite get that, but there's a gradual evolution in the engine design. I mean, you go to the bucket lifters, now you don't need to have 2 springs on the head, and oh my gosh, and you can incorporate a lot of those improvements on an earlier engine. So.
John, can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
On one of the engines, Sean O'Malley, on an early engine that's been sitting around a long time, Dick was talking about lubricants. What would you lubricate? And like some of them, how do you get if it's a difficult spot? Would you pull out the oil pump? Things like that.
If you're just worried about getting it pre-lubed, you can take the fitting off the back of the engine, and the one where the oil comes out goes off to the oil cooler, and you can glug oil down in there and turn the engine backwards, and that'll screw oil down through the oil pump. So you can get oil there so you can prime it faster, when you're spinning it. But other than shooting some oil in the cylinders, and turning it over once in a while, that's all, for storage. I think that's about all that you can do.
John, is it possible to pre-fill the oil pump, or I'm sorry, the oil cooler through the line that goes from the back of the engine to the cooler?
Well, as long as you got a lot of newspapers or diapers or rags or something, I can't imagine a mess. What a mess. Normally it wouldn't go empty, right? Unless it's been hanging up on the wall and it's drained out. I mean, I suppose you could put a funnel in one end and leave the other end open, and start to run it through, but I just spin the engine over until you had the pressure. You can, yes, you can. It would be, the guys who build, and there's always somebody out there who's an aircraft mechanic, and they just shudder at what we tell people to do. But we're running on terra firma. If you lose the engine, you don't necessarily crash. So.
Hi, John, can you hear me?
Yes.
Stu Colt here, St. Catharines.
Yeah, Stu.
Rebuilding an MGB engine, and just to make sure I got this right, you're suggesting we put in cast iron guides, right? Valve guides?
Yep, both Dick and I are on the same page on that. Yep.
Good, thank you very much.
We thought, or the machine shops thought, when they dropped the lead out of the gasoline in 1975, it was like, oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to run our cars anymore. And, the lead is what conducts the heat, from the valve into the valve, into the head. And that's what lubricates the stem. And without all this, we're not going to be able to run our engines anymore. And it's going to be the end of the world. And so then they came out with these phosphor bronze or whatever these things are, the gold colored ones. And then, of course, right in the beginning, without any further knowledge, you put them in with 0.5 thousandths of clearance, and the engine would get hot, and then all the valves would stick. You'd bend, push, right, just a mess. So we always used a figure of 2 thousandths, but Dick says 3 on those phosphor bronze, and then so the valves are wallowing around in its guide. So it can't always. It just doesn't make sense. It can seal as well as it could with a cast iron guide. So cast iron stuff is just fine. And you use those umbrella oil seals, and they fit right on the guide. It's a Felpro, F-E-L-P-R-O 70373. That's usually somebody's got to use that as a guide. Because even when we used to go to Napa, we just got the seals at Napa. They had their own part number. So it's a 1965 Chevy truck or something. Yeah, it's a 70373. So.
Great, thanks, John.
Hey, John, can you hear me?
Hey,
Big Fisher here.
Hey, nice. You're sitting in your engine bay tonight, right?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. You were going back to oil coolers. I've got mine's a late model, 78, no oil cooler was on it. I've got a 73 parts car that has an oil cooler. Is it recommended to put an oil cooler on?
I'd say do something else. It's unnecessary. What does Dick say?
Where are you located, Greg?
I live in Southern California. I'm relatively desert area, so it gets kind of warm in the summer. I mean, we're 90 degrees today, 95.
Yeah, if you're running 95 degrees, it certainly can't hurt. There's no downside to it. I don't think there's a big benefit in moderate climates, in high temperature climates like yours. If it was me and I had the oil, if I had the opportunity, I'd probably put it on as just extra insurance. I mean, certainly we do that with all the race cars now because of the very high temperatures we're running. But in your case, at 95 degrees or in southern climates, yeah, I think it'd probably be a good idea.
So, Greg, when you go to take that oil filter and remove the hoses from it, so you can clean it up and clean all that stuff up and mount it, because it mounts in a different configuration. The way to separate the hoses from the aluminum threads on the oil cooler is to take a torch and warm up that fitting. Well, not warm it up, get about as hot as you can get with a propane torch, and then have a 5-gallon pail of water and plunge that fitting with a hose on it and everything into the water so that it cools instantly. And then use your 7/8 and 15/16 wrench and put them on there, and that gland nut will turn off almost by hand. If it doesn't, heat it, you didn't get it hot enough, heat it up and plunge it in again. So the way you get dissimilar metals separated is by quenching. You can't quench unless it's heated up. They get in a stud out of an exhaust manifold. You turn it cherry red hot and work with it carefully. But you can't get aluminum cherry red hot because it doesn't, just melts. Anyway, you can't get it too hot with a propane torch. So heat it until it's blowing red. And that's, an oxyacetylene torch is the faster way to do it, but depends on what you got available. Oxyacetylene, you got to be careful. But again, you get it really hot and plunge it, and the coefficient of expansion is different, and the threads will pull away from each other, and it'll just come right off.
Does it make more sense just to buy a new oil cooler? They're not horribly expensive.
Can't tell you. I can tell you that the rule of thumb is that any original part refurbished is better than any new part. Now that's a rule. Nobody refurbishes used bearings. Nobody puts brake material on old brake pads. I mean, there are limits to these hard and fast rules I've got, but you got an oil cooler that's there, just clean it out as best you can. And, you know, you can argue about whether you should paint it or not, but paint it so it looks nice and mount it underneath there and it'll be just fine.
I would just add to John's comment there, and that is if you have an oil cooler with a known history, then certainly that's a candidate. You could flush it real good as best you can and use it. Bear in mind that the internals of an oil cooler are the clearances are very small. So it's hard to get debris out. So I would never, ever use an oil cooler for which I did not know the history. I would never buy an oil cooler off of eBay or buy one at a swap meet or use one from a buddy, because it's possible that there was a catastrophic engine failure and there's debris in there. And Greg, as you pointed out, a new cooler is not all that expensive. So if you have one with a known history and you can flush it out and reuse it, I'd say sure. If you don't know the history, then I would not consider reusing it and I would buy a new one.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the original parts car was running fine.
Sure.
Got a question. Two,
Yes,
actually.
sir.
Hey, this is Jay.
Yes.
Okay, so something that was brought up during this conversation that I'd not heard before, and you, John, helped me walk through replacing the oil sump and 3 of the 5 bearings. So I did all that, and just now I was alerted to the fact that there are 2 different seals for that oil pump. And at the time that we did that, I don't remember that ever coming up in the conversation. So I have no way of knowing which of the 2 I may have.
Yeah, you most certainly do. Do you have oil pressure?
So I haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay, well, okay, all right. So it's the 3 main has 5 holes. And the 5 main has 6 holes.
Okay, this was 2 summers ago, and I can't tell you what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Okay, well, how close is your engine in the car?
Oh yeah, it's in the car. I'm down to the electric, and this is what my actual question is.
Well, here, just
Go ahead.
so just if you don't mind a mess, just take the rear fitting off the block. What year is your car?
It's a 71 engine.
Okay, so you got an oil cooler on there. So just knock that rear fitting off the rear of the block and spin the engine over. And within a couple of seconds, you should have like a real slow garden hose of oil coming out of that, making your starter motor and the side of your engine all oily and your floor oily. But that instantly, you know you've got oil pressure or not.
Okay. All right. The main question is.
I was going to say, if you're a pack rat like most of us, look in your leftover parts and see which one you have left. Yep. The other one's in your car.
Now there's a good idea. Actually, I do. I have everything that I replaced is in a box with itself.
Well, if you still got a little triangular sort of gasket, you can call me tomorrow, and show it to me you can FaceTime or something or other, and call Dick too, and we'll tell you instantly whether you got the right one or not. I just helped a guy put together an engine. He picked it up from the machine shop. Oh, I don't know, 8 years ago, something or other. Craig, I'm talking about you. And he did that hybrid. They put the block they put the crank and the pistons and rods in and everything, and floats and getting the piston ring gap, and they've got the tools to get all that stuff done correctly. And anyway, he put the wrong gasket in, and I just kind of wondered, and before we put the head on, I spun the engine over to see if we could get oil out of it, and we couldn't. So it was a whole lot easier to turn it upside down and get the sump off and get the right gasket in there.
Okay. So my other question regard to putting headlight relays in. I've got all the wiring back in place with absent any relays at all. Everything is resoldered and recrimped. All new fittings and all new connectors and all of that from the firewall forward is all new.
Okay.
It's all connected. I have high beams, low beams, turn signals, rear tail lights, all of that works, everything. when I put the relays in, I got nothing. I take the relays out, put it all back together, everything works. I have
Okay.
no idea what I'm doing wrong.
Okay, all right, well, the relay has an operational coil, right, that magnetizes. So that's got to go between ground, which, you know, you got grounded them somehow. And then the other wire is the blue with white or blue with red that comes from the switch. And the only way you can tell that is with a test light. So you pull the wires apart. You've got over on the right-hand side, for instance, you've got three blue with whites, and one of those is coming from the switch, and that's hot, and that's got to go to the relay. So the blue with white goes through the coil in the relay to ground, and then the other two connectors on the relay go to the other blue with whites and your power lead from wherever you brought a power lead from, off your starter motor, or that's the best place to bring it. So you've got to have a power. That's probably, I've got some stuff printed that I can send you by email, because this comes up a lot, and I got very distinct drawings on what it used to look like and what it should look like when it's done. So just send me an email tonight now, and I'll by tomorrow morning or so, I'll send you that wiring instruction back.
John,
Okay,
can I add a
relays.
little something here?
Yes.
Thanks. I just pulled up something, and if you guys want to take some notes real quick, this is how to wire any relay for any purpose, any 4-pole relay. Relays are universal, 4-pole relays are universal, and they may be numbered, the terminals may be numbered one of 4 ways. They may be numbered 30, 85, 86, and 87, or they might be numbered C1, C2, W1, and W2. And here's what you need to know. C1 is the same as 30, which is power, B+, straight battery power. C2 is the same as 87, and that goes to the device being switched. So if it's a headlight relay, then that would go to the headlight. W1 is the same as 86, and that comes from the switch. So that would come from your headlight switch, as an example. And W2 is the same as 85, and that's ground. So when you're wiring anything, and that applies to things like your starter relay and other relays, and if anybody needs that and didn't catch that, then you're welcome to message me after the session, and I can send that to you. But you can use that pattern for any relay, for a horn relay, headlight relay, anything you want to wire.
Okay, the relays that I have are the ones that John recommended. It's from the guy in Canada. He puts the whole thing together with the instructions and the relays, and they're on a little bracket.
That's from Bruce. His work is excellent.
Yeah, that's the guy. That's the guy.
Yep,
Bruce.
he's terrific.
So
He's terrific.
like I
Well,
said,
follow his instructions, but if you have a question, then message me afterwards, and I'll be glad to give you that same information I just gave you.
okay.
Those old Lucas relays are handy because the W1 and W2 stands for winding, and the C1 and C2 stand for contacts. So windings and contacts, that's how I always kept the old ones. You hardly ever see those anymore. It's all the 85, 86, 87. And there are relays that are normally open. That's what most of them are, but there are relays that are normally closed. So there's lots of possibilities there. Do we have any more questions about engines before we get into? Yes.
This is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Larry Stansel from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And I have a 71 MGB. And this morning I was driving my car about 50 miles an hour. And then suddenly just had all kinds of blue smoke coming out the tailpipe instantly.
Okay.
And of course I pulled over, cut the engine off, looked under the bonnet, nothing was obvious. Got back in it, cranked it back up, no smoke. Drove it another 200 yards, had smoke, came home and parked it. And prior to this, about 2 days ago, my oil pressure would not get above probably 55.
You got an electric oil pressure gauge on that 71, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah, those are, you can't rely on those as being accurate, but oil pressure and blue smoke are most often two very different things. I would think if it happened all of a sudden, it's either because some hose collapsed and you got a whole lot of crankshaft, crankcase pressure. You know, originally there's some hoses on there that went to a charcoal injection and all that kind of stuff. If that stuff has been blocked off or crimped or something or other, you can get a whole lot of pressure inside the engine, and then the scraper rings can't scrape the oil down, and it'll burn a lot of oil. Or you had just an instant catastrophic failure with oil rings on your piston.
I'd add to that also, you might have broken an oil line, either the fat one that comes off the back of the block to the oil cooler, or the little small one next to that would go to your electric oil pressure sending unit. And a good way, if there's oil all over the starter motor area, then there's a good chance that you might have had a failure of one of those hoses.
Okay, Bob. All those hoses are brand new. They've been replaced within the last couple of months.
Okay, but remember that, but there's no substitution for, look, but you looked underneath there. You didn't see any oil dripping and everything.
Yeah, there's no oil dripping anywhere.
Well, you can do a compression test, you know, and if you got real bad compression in one cylinder, you know there's a problem, but you can have perfect compression and the oil rings are just worthless. So it's you have to you just have to do it by that list that we had up there earlier, and you know, make sure that your oil is oil and not oil and gasoline mixed. If you got one of the carburetors is for whatever reason dumping a lot of fuel, you'll instead of having 4 quarts of oil in your sump, you can have 6 quarts of oil and gas. Boy, that'll smoke. So, you know, don't take the engine apart first.
Don't worry.
do some investigation, and you can find Dick or Dick. Do you have an email or a website or an email address people can use, or?
Sure, they can just use Dick Moritz at AOL. DickMoritz, Dick Moritz at AOL.com. Sure.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Good luck. Good luck with your BE.
Okay,
John,
thank you.
Engine question.
Yes.
Always a question. I've been kind of suspicious that my umbrella seals are either missing or not very effective on my C. I get a bit of smoke, you know, not a lot. But is it possible to change umbrella seals with the head in situ without disassembling it? And can you walk us through that?
So you have to hold the valves closed. How are you going to do that? One of two ways. You can either turn all the loosen all the rockers absolutely loose, so you can spin all the rockers vertically so they're out of the way, and not going to open the valves when the engine turns. And take off the number 1. And is this on your B or your C?
C.
Okay, take off your number 1 and your number 13 rocker. And then you can pressurize if you've got a fitting from your oil pressure or from your compression gauge. It'll take compressed air, and there's no chance you're going to lose compressed air. Then you can put that in there and just hook it up. The engine will violently spin until that piston's at the bottom of its stroke, but it'll hold the valves closed. Now it's almost a 2-person operation. You use a pair of screwdrivers and you go underneath the rocker shaft and you bear down on the top cup on top of the spring. Someone takes the collets out, you let up on it, the cup comes off, springs come off. change the seal. Don't even do it unless you have a new set of seals to start with. And then you just put it back together. If there's an issue with pressure, you've got the tools. You can take old cotton rope and feed that down inside the cylinder, turn the edge over by hand, disconnect the starter so you can't possibly hit it. You end up bending the rod or something. But compress a whole lot of rope up against there.
Understand.
And that'll also do the job. Now Dick will tell you how to do it.
I agree with the rope trick, and I just would add to that, just if you're using the rope, just go ahead and bring the piston up until it binds the clothesline up against the bottom of the valve, and then put the car in gear, and that will just be a little extra insurance to keep the piston from turning if you should have occasion to try and do that. Other than that, the rope works fine.
Do you have to take the whole, like all the rockers off, or like how do you?
Well, no, you back the adjusters all the way out. All the way out. I mean, all the way off, and then bump the engine over. And when the valve is closed, usually you can depress the valve a little bit and slip the rocker out of the way. You can take the rocker shaft off, but on your car also the head studs also hold the rocker in place.
Correct.
I don't like loosening up that much of the head gasket. But
you were saying about taking two screwdrivers and pushing the spring down. Is that what you were suggesting?
Levering it underneath the rocker shaft. So you got here's the rocker shaft, and here's the valve over here, and you put a screwdriver on this side of the cup and that side of the cup, and you bring those down. So you almost need a second person there to lift the collets out of the top, or use a magnet.
Yes.
The worst thing is the losing one. That's not a problem. There's lots more of them out there. The worst one is when it hops on the push rod hole. So. And then it's interfering with it. Anyway, so it's best to do it with a two. You just do it. You get all the stuff in place, and you'll learn as you go. The number 13 will be just a slam dunk. You'll have it all organized by then.
Number 13. Oh yeah.
Oh, excuse me, not number. Yeah, excuse me, number 12. The 12. I was number 13. Yeah,
that's the 19th hole in golf, right? The 19th hole. Well, when we do the rolling tech session in Peterborough, I'll bring that one under the umbrella for you, and you can do it
we can talk about it. No.
We're going to talk about it. We're not doing it.
Yes, that'd be a little dicey. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just in passing, we had an article in our club magazine last month about one of the guys who is a professional motor builder found that the owner had put the collets in upside down. And so I don't remember, because I don't plan on taking mine apart, but it seems to me that they went in counterintuitively. So I suggested Alan look at them. Hopefully they're in correctly now, and put it back in the same way.
Well, the car's not running that badly, and I'm not sure how far I'm going to worry about it at the moment. So we're doing pretty well. Thank you.
Well, we're chewing it up with engine problems here. We still have to get to Ben Andrews with his fuel sending unit, but we will once there are no more engine questions. I just want to play this out completely because I asked Dick to come on tonight, and he's kind enough to. And what's an engine when you do an engine, Dick? Is there sort of a rough price? It used to be $1,000 a cylinder, but is there a rough price that you tell people when you start off? Or
not so much. Probably for a stock rebuild, probably less than $4,000, and then if they want to do performance upgrades, then that can add to it for porting work and things like that. And we mentioned performance work earlier in the conversation. And I suggest there's a lot to talk about there about, because a lot of people call me all the time and say, how do I upgrade the performance of I want more grunt from my MGB engine. And there are things that we can do to do that. And I think if there's enough interest, John, you can decide, maybe we do another session in the future about street performance engines.
Sure. We did, Carl Heidemann and I did a tuning for speed class. I talk about this a lot. Oh my gosh, this is a long time ago now, when we're still on Fulton Street. And there's a 3-day seminar, and we talked about all the cool stuff you can get: exhaust extractors and big bore exhausts and split fire spark plugs and atomic fire injector spark plugs and everything. And so of course, 99% of it's all snake oil. But the first day of our seminar, we tuned up this guy's MGB. He drove it from Hershey, Pennsylvania to Grand Rapids, Michigan, about 800 miles. And so he was the victim. He was the guinea pig. So before we changed the timing, we checked the timing before I took the distributor out, and found that it was 27 degrees before top dead center, full mechanical advance. So we took the distributor out, serviced the distributor, everything, put it back in, set it at 32 where it's supposed to be. And the next day we went to the dynamometer, and his engine in rear wheel, an accelerator type of dyno, he was getting 62 horsepower, and we set the timing back to 27 just to see what a difference that would make. He lost 5 horsepower. So that's what I tell people a lot about performance parts. I said, you know, it's it may be the engine which isn't doing well. You know, most often it's the nut behind the steering wheel, right? But anyway, just a good tune-up sometimes can restore an awful lot of power to an engine. Do we have any more comments about engines?
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
Am I on, Craig?
Yeah, you're on, Craig.
So I got a question for John or Dick. Is that me or is that you? Okay, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine.
So this is a question which obviously pertains to my engine, but I'll ask it somewhat generically. What would you do if someone came to you and they had an engine, you know, which they had been told was rebuilt, but they weren't sure and they wanted to test it or check it before it went in the car? But it was not a likely candidate for a full rebuild. How would you deal with that situation? Would you take the head off? Would you do measurements? Yeah, just sort of, I basically rebuilt my engine about 15 years ago and took the car off the road because it was rotting away. And now I can't really remember. I was having some problem with the engine, but I can't really remember what was wrong with it because it's ages ago. So I'm just wondering if I'm looking at a full rebuild, or is there some way that I can sort of gauge the health of the engine? I obviously don't want to stick it back in the car, you know, and then have, you know, problems down the road. If that question makes any sense.
Well, if the engine's just been sitting still for
it has
15 years, then if you check the compression, 2 of the cylinders are going to be the compression is going to be in the toilet because the valves rust. Okay. And so you can't make a determination on the compression until it's run. Okay. Making the engine run requires cooling it. You can run it on the floor. It isn't going to hop around or anything. You can put carbs on it in the manifold if your neighbors will stand the noise. And you can run it for 20 minutes and watch the oil pressure and all that kind of stuff. But you've got to feed it with gasoline, and mostly you've got to cool it. Yeah. That's the hassle. So it almost would be easier, quite frankly, to put it in the car and see.
Yeah. Okay.
Dick, what do you think?
I guess if I could get it to a dyno, that would be one thing. Well, that actually might be more effort than putting it in the car, but.
Greg, do you recall if you used various assembly lubricants when you built the motor?
So I had a very well-known shop rebuild the motor, and then you know, I had some problems with it afterwards, and then I wasn't in the city anymore where the engine was rebuilt. And so I had it looked at the place I was in, and it was a huge long sag. I remember I had some oil burning, which I wasn't happy with because it was a fresh engine. It had been bored out to 20 thou over, and I had a hot cam in it. And then I had some overheating problems. And then it was sort of running okay. And then the body got too bad and I took it off the road. So, you know, that's why I'm not, you know, happy with just dropping it back in the car. But those were the two things I remember. And I had a kind of back and forth with the shop. It was a whole kind of drama, right? So, and again, you know, it's so much time has gone by now that I'm even having trouble remembering what exactly the specific problems were.
Honest engine, Craig, I think there's too many question marks with this engine, with questions about oil coolant, about oil pressure, about other issues. You're not exactly sure how it was built. My advice, whether you want to hear it or not, is I'd pull it all apart, because after 15 years, the piston rings, because of galvanic action, they're cast iron and aluminum pistons. They may very well be stuck to the pistons. They might or might not free up if you run the engine with Marvel.
Dick, I'm gonna hit the mute all here for a minute because I got too much background noise. There we go. All right, Dick, go ahead and unmute yourself again. Sorry. Dick, you have to unmute yourself. Dick, you're gonna have to unmute yourself. There we go. I'm sorry. I had a lot of background noise here. I've got it again. So.
Okay, Craig, I really think there's too many question marks here, with an unknown history, with problems before it, and rings may be stuck to the pistons because it's been sitting for so long, and the galvanic action of cast iron rings and aluminum pistons. And I really just think there's just too many questions, and my advice is pull it apart and check everything. I hate to say it, but I would. Craig, you need to unmute. Craig, you need to unmute.
No, that's very good advice, and that's not, you know, that's kind of what I was expecting you to say. I just thought I'd ask, and I'm into a full rebuild, so, you know, do the engine. So basically treat it like it needs a full rebuild, essentially.
Well, and you may not need to rebuild it. Maybe all the bearings are fine. Maybe the lifters and the cam are all just fine. As John says, 2 of the cylinders will have had open valves, so you're going to have some rust and corrosion within the combustion area anyway. And so maybe most of the rebuild is salvageable, but maybe some of it's not, and you can fix what's not, and then you can also have full confidence in it.
That's good. But yeah, right. But take it apart, basically. That's
yes,
great.
Absolutely.
Yep. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, John. I really appreciate the advice.
Hey, you're very welcome.
Another
John,
question.
Doug Wolfire here.
Yeah, Doug.
So this is a question from a few weeks back, and you suggested we wait until Dick gets on the conversation.
Okay.
And so that was, when you're rebuilding an engine, we know we're supposed to orientate our rings with the gap at about 120 degrees, but does it matter which side of the piston they're on?
It does not. And also, one of the things I learned in all those years working with the Perfect Circle engineers is that the rings rotate when the engine's running. So as a practical matter, it really doesn't matter. When I'm building an engine, I have a certain routine, I have a certain discipline. They say insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So in my mind, what that means is sanity is doing things the same way over and over again and expecting the same results. So in my engine assembly, I have a certain discipline, a certain practice. I always do stagger the rings, not because I think it makes a difference, but because it's all part of my discipline and it makes me feel better doing it. So the fact of the matter is, doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Answers the question.
Yeah.
I've got.
John, I have a question.
Oh.
Yes, let's go for it.
Rick Foster from Whidbey Island, Washington.
Yes, sir.
Reground camshafts compared to new, like say a Delta camshaft compared to VP11 cam. Do you have any ideas on that, Dick or John?
I think Anton always uses new cores to build his cams because every now and then they're waiting for cores to come in. But Dick uses Delta cams. I found out yesterday. We used to use a place, oh my gosh. It was run by women. It was the most unusual thing in this trade. It was a camshaft rebuilder. And we used to send out like 10 cams at once, and they'd go through them. I suppose it just depends on whether they're hardened and treated properly when they come back. If you're buying a cam for $55, chances are it's not good. What's your comment on that, Dick?
Thanks. I really like the Delta D9 grind, and that's directly comparable to an APT VP12 cam. And that's a great cam for street performance use. I use it in most of my street performance builds. I have no problem with a reground cam from Delta because I deal with them an awful lot. And when they regrind a cam, they also harden the lobes. So I'm very comfortable with that.
Thank you.
John, I have a question.
Yeah.
Talked to you about it before. The screw that holds in the distributor mounting housing.
Yeah.
I tried an impact driver. I tried everything, and that won't come loose.
You're just not hitting it. You're not hitting it hard enough.
If I hit it any harder, I'll break my arm.
A new hammer.
I got a new little sledgehammer. I've tried it. A propane torch won't give me enough heat, will it?
No.
And I don't want to. Now the two bolts that hold the pinch plate will hold that plate in, but I don't want to do the DPO thing and just cut it. And that's not a good idea. So I'm gonna have to take it somewhere and have somebody put some.
Well, you just someone younger who's got who can accelerate a sledgehammer more quickly than you. But that's the old fashioned. If you hit it hard enough, it will come loose. If you had an oxyacetylene torch,
yeah, I don't have one.
You could heat just the screw, and just wait for the rose color to leave it, and then whack, and then it'll come out. So
I'll just beat it some more.
Bob, is the engine in the car or out of the car?
It's in the car, which
Yeah, that
gives
makes
me
it
a hard time to. It's hard to get a good swing. I got a 3-pound hammer.
Yes. Yes. Generally, I do them out of the car, and of course, there you can get a good shot at it with an impact driver and an MFH, and that always does the trick for me out of the car. I've never had one not come out. I would just add this: in an extreme case, what you could possibly do is remove the distributor and remove the distributor hold down clamp with the two little 1/4-28 bolts.
Yeah, I've
Hold
done that.
in. And then what you could possibly do is fill the hole with rags and use a hammer and a chisel, because that's the part that holds in is called the retainer for the distributor drive gear, the drive gear retainer. And that's actually cast iron, not steel. Because what we find is people will call me and say, I'm trying to get that out, and I got the screw out, but the retainer was stuck in the block. And so I started tapping it with a hammer and I broke it. And the reason you break it is because it's cast iron, not steel. And so I would say to you, in an extreme case, if you don't have access to a torch or anything else, you could take the distributor out, take the clamp off, fill the hole with rags, and then take a hammer and a chisel in the vicinity of that screw and actually break away the drive gear retainer itself. Break the cast iron away from it until you can get a pair of vice grips onto the screw itself, and then you can screw it out and then just get a replacement retainer out of a used engine.
That was my next question, if I could do that with a chisel. I have two other things. I went to the show at Fort Meigs, a great show. I recommend it. I told the man up there I would give him a plug. Very friendly, great show. But the other thing is John Wolf, who does the speedometers and all the gauges.
Yes.
He told me to thank you for mentioning him.
Oh.
And he's going to be there. I said, "Are you going to retire soon?" He says, "I will quit when I fall off the bench." So he said to tell you thanks for mentioning him.
Oh yeah, we're like Neisinger until they get flooded out, that was it. So one of the other tricks there, Bob, is to get the bonnet so it's all but vertical, right? Yeah. And then put something soft across the left front fender and the top of the engine and lean over the engine from the driver's side.
Okay.
So that you're leaning over and knocking down, rather than knocking towards the engine, knocking towards yourself, you know?
That's
So,
a good
but
idea.
it's a 15-minute job to get it all prepped and wiggle yourself on top of the engine. But it's just,
I don't wiggle as well as I used to.
yeah, right. Okay. Anyway,
I don't
just,
know if I would have the strength to do it. I don't
No,
know.
I'll do it. I'll try that.
Yeah.
I'll try anything. I mean, the car runs okay, but I know it's supposed to be at 2 o'clock, the slot, and it's at 5. And so I don't know how that happened, and somebody
put it together wrong, but,
Yeah.
you know, but it, you know, if, is the distributor in a real odd position then, or what?
Well, the distributor, I have to, it's so far
Oh,
to
okay.
the right that it like interferes with the dipstick. even.
Okay, all right, okay.
Bob, if you have the room, then you can simply rotate, loosen the pinch bolt on the clamp, rotate to the distributor body 90 degrees or 90 degrees counterclockwise, and then move the spark plug wires in the distributor cap 1 tower clockwise.
Oh.
You follow me?
Yeah, yeah.
So you're going to maintain the position of the number one of all the spark plug wires. You're going to maintain the position relative to the distributor rotor. You're just rotating the body around the rotors. So if your vacuum advance unit right now is pointing like what, about 230, something like that?
Yeah, something like that. About
Sure.
3 o'clock.
Just 3 o'clock. Just loosen the pinch bolt, rotate the body of the distributor 90 degrees counterclockwise till the vacuum advance unit is pointing straight up, and then move each spark plug wire 1 tower in the opposite direction. And then just reset the timing, and Bob's your uncle.
No, the only thing about that is I don't want to be the DPO if I should ever sell the car, the doggone previous owner. I've run into a lot of those.
No one's, you know, so, yeah.
I like that idea though.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna lean over the fender and beat it. Maybe that'll work.
And then if that doesn't work, we'll do it the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, appreciate it. And
Yeah.
again, thank you much.
You're welcome. Gosh, we got 15 minutes left in our normal session, but I'm keen, and I will get to Ben and his question about
okay.
the.
Yeah. Hey, on a 3-main engine rebuild, is there any tricks and tips to that? And the rear oil seals, leave well enough alone with the original?
Put the bolts in the crank before you put the crank in the engine.
Bolts.
The bolts that go through the crank that hold the flywheel.
Okay.
You don't know, I can tell from your agreement that you're going, what? But the 5 mains are held on with bolts, right? And the bolts thread into the crank, but the 3 main, there's bolts in the crank that hold the flywheel because there's nuts on the back of the flywheel.
Oh, guess I never took it apart yet. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well that's it. I know 2 people. One person. I'm a fanatic about this, putting the right stuff, this Permatex stuff between the gasket and the valve cover or the sump or the timing cover, and then putting grease on the other side. So you can take it apart if you have to. If you've made some stupid mistake, it just comes apart and it doesn't cause it to leak. It's great. It's just wonderful. And one guy I know put together an MGA engine and didn't take my advice and gooed it all up. He got so mad at the sump because it wouldn't come off that he needed a sump by the end of the day too, because he had the 3-pound hammer before Bob did, and he was smacking the sump and it wouldn't come off. Oh my gosh. So anyway, yeah, that's all. That's my comment about a 3-main engine.
Yeah, I would just add to that, if you're going to replace the camshaft, make sure you get a 3-main camshaft, because it's going to have the gear on the back for the mechanical tachometer drive, and that gear will not fit onto a 5-main camshaft.
Yeah.
And make sure that you have the bottom end of the engine align board, ALIGN, align board, so that the rear slinger sits around the scroll thread on the crankshaft snugly enough that it doesn't leak much. You can't.
Yeah, that was my thought was you had mentioned that 30 years ago. Yeah,
It's
tech
a
seminar. You know?
yeah, it's a two-step process. First of all, they gotta make sure that the scroll thread is round, because that wears too. And then they measure that and get the rear main cap to sit as close as they can to that, which is around, it's the same as the bearing clearance, around 2/1000 of an inch. How many 3-main engines do you do, Nick?
Not a lot. I'd probably do 8 or 10 5-main engines for every 3-main. I have a 3-main in the shop right now that I'm doing. The majority, I think it's just because of the percentage of cars on the road, but
Sure.
also I do a fair number of MGB 3-main engines that people then want to transplant into their MGA. Because if you're going, for instance, from a 1500 MGA to an 1800 MGB, you get 20% more power instantly just by virtue of the added displacement. And then if you want to do performance upgrades after that, then it's a really dramatic difference. So, and I usually have, I don't want to sound like a sales pitch here, but I usually have a couple cores here of both 3-main and 5-main, because people might have an MGA and want to upgrade and they need a core, and sometimes I have that. Also, somebody just messaged in and said, would I repeat my email address? And my email address is just Dick Moritz, DICK MORITZ @AOL.com. All one word, Dick Moritz @AOL.com. Sorry for the commercial, guys.
Oh, and
No,
Dick,
that's fair enough. I mean, it's getting harder and harder to find. I mean, anybody will rebuild the engine, especially your next door neighbor who builds race engines, right? And the standard line is those only last one race, right? I want an engine that's going to stay together. I had a guy one time, his brother-in-law was going to rebuild his XPAG engine on his TC or TD. And the owner came down to the shop and he said, I need every single nut and bolt that holds the engine together. I said, well, what happened to the old ones? He goes, well, you know, my brother-in-law, the engine builder, said, well, I thought you were going to get all new nuts and bolts. That's what we always do. And of course, you know, that XPAG engine stuff is just harder to get your hands on. So
yeah, I actually had a call from a guy who was trying to rebuild XPAG engine, and his first comment was, I can't get the pistons out of the block. Well, on an XPAG engine, the pistons won't come out of the block because the big end of the connecting rod is bigger than the bore of the cylinder. So the pistons and rods have to come out from the bottom after the crankshaft is out, and the guy building the engine didn't know that.
So yeah, I always say, the people ask me stuff like that. It's like, I say, do you have a copy of the workshop manual? You know, and then there's some hem and hawing, and it's like, well, I built engines before, and it's like, okay, you know, so you can call me 8 more times, but just easier to get that information. I also have some information about building MGB engines in text form, and if anyone wants that, you can send me an email. Just, you know, ask for the engine rebuild stuff, and it's just a ton of stuff that'll come through on your email. So,
and I'd certainly encourage everybody to take advantage of that, because it is terrific. And I will also say this, for those of you who are familiar with the MG Experience forum online, a few years back, a master machinist named Dale Spooner used to own a high-end machine shop called Motion Machine Shop. He did very, very high-end work. And he wrote in one day and he said, hey, would anybody be interested if I were to do a series of posts here on the forum outlining all the various machining operations involved in rebuilding an MGB engine? And everybody said, oh yeah, that'd be great, that'd be awesome. So Dale ended up doing a whole series, several hundred posts showing all the machining operations, from crank grinding to block boring to head work, and including photos and videos of all of that. And so I contacted Dale, whom I didn't know at the time, and I said, hey, listen, I said, I'm not a machinist, but I'm an engine builder. I said, what do you think if you do all the machine work and document it and then ship all the stuff up to me, and I'll just continue the thread with the actual assembly of the engine? He said, oh, that'd be terrific. He said, but what do we do? We're going to end up with an engine that's all complete and rebuilt. What will we do with it? I thought a little bit and I said, you know what? I said, why don't we auction it off on the forum and give all the money to the Make-A-Wish Foundation? And he said, oh, that'd be terrific. So we ended up doing that. And there's a series now of about 500 posts. And we ended up doing that. He did the machine work. I did the build. We documented everything. We auctioned the motor off. And when all is said and done, we ended up donating more than $6,000 to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. The winning bid was, I think, $4,800. And then a bunch of people wrote in and said, I don't need the motor, but it's a really cool thing. Can I donate to this? And people would send me money and PayPal me money to add to the kitty. And we ended up giving $6,200 to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which was really cool. So if you Google MG Experience Forum or mgexp.com, and then just do a search for Make-A-Wish Engine or Make-A-Wish Foundation, or if you want to email me, I'll be glad to send you a link. But I think it's really helpful, and I think you might learn something.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
So Dale's still doing engine work up in Danville, Virginia. He does heads and everything else under the sun. He's taking Fridays off, but he's still working 4 days a week.
Super, good to know. Thank you.
Okay, so next time it's 8:55. I want to answer some of these other questions. Next time we'll get Dick on here and we'll talk about the performance parts. My associate, I call him my associate, Carl Heidemann. He worked for me when he was in high school. He's got his own shop in Holland, Michigan. Not a full-time operation, but not his full-time operation. But he did a whole lot of inspections, putting one item on after another and put it on the dyno. Does it make a difference or not? Now you would think, of course, that a big bore exhaust would make a dramatic difference over a little exhaust. Zero, none, no difference at all. And you'd think, well, the factory exhaust manifold, the double wide manifold, that's the best manifold that you can get. And you look at that Stromberg manifold and it comes out and goes to the front and down through a catalytic converter. And you think, well, I mean, that's just going to rob it of tons of horsepower, 2 horsepower. That's all that you lose on that. So Carl's got a lot of information, and I'll be happy to talk with Dick at another seminar, another session sometime this summer. And we can go over that because it's a lot of information. In the meantime, I didn't know this stuff was on MG Experience about the engine building and all the machine work stuff. That's really nice to know. Any other questions about engines? I got three minutes left to answer Ben's question.
I've got a quick deal.
You can skip mine.
No, Ben, I'm putting you on, but I will answer at least yours.
I'll call you. I got a tornado watch, so got to roll.
Oh yeah, that's what we're supposed to. All right, okay, all right. So, did someone else try to break in there when Ben?
Yeah, if you want to answer Ben's question quickly, then you can come back to me later.
No, go ahead, Greg.
Cool. I have an 18V engine, 5-main, obviously from the 72. It's a fairly low mileage car, classic bar fine story, 37,000 miles on the engine. My theory when I started taking it apart, and I think back to one of your videos, John, when you said that when you start taking these things apart, they develop an appetite. So
that was my late wife's comment. Don't if you're going to open it up, if you're going to look at the lifters are going to be worn. See, well, if those are worn, the cam's worn, right? And the chain's worn, and the tensioner's worn, and.
Yeah, so my philosophy for breaking it down was just to replace all the gaskets and seals. Engine was pretty clean on the inside, didn't have any problems, no rust, didn't have any seizing issues. It turns over really well. I used your advice and put a gasoline-like substance in cylinders to see how they would leak down. Your wife, your ex-wife, your late wife would be proud. I didn't use gasoline. I used kerosene. So it seems like I wasn't smart enough to check compression before I cracked the head off of it. I didn't think about that. So I've got it all apart, but to the point where all the valves, all the seals, all the rubber and gaskets are out of it. Which means I haven't turned or touched the main bolts or the rod caps. Should I, or should I just leave well enough alone, put it back together?
Do you have the front engine? Do you have the front and rear engine bearing plates off?
Yes, the front plate and back plate.
Well, then take the main caps off and just get the size bearings. They're probably standard, but just get them and put new ones in. I mean, here you are. I mean, you know, it's just it makes all the sense in the world. That thread, there are 3 of the caps there have got a 1/2 inch, 1/20 thread in them. And there are adapters that you can get to screw down into there. The poor man's way out of this is to get a 1/2 inch fine bolt from your front suspension or something and screw it into there and put a pair of vice grips on it and use Bob's 3-pound hammer and tunk, 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 tunk. You can get the caps off that way. It's a whole lot better to use a puller. The slide
I was
hammer.
thinking a slide hammer or something like that.
Slide hammer, yeah, but that's a 1/20 thread in those caps. So.
Okay. So should I then pull the pistons out and check the rings? And I guess I should probably just do all that while I'm there.
Man, you know, I mean, you're there, you know, you got to pull the pistons out and then get a dingleberry brush, you know, and put a crosshatch in there and get some, the three kind of rings that we liked were either Grant, Hastings, or Deves, or Divas, however you pronounce it. They're all, I think Grant makes or Hastings or somebody makes the basic ring, and the other two companies machine it. And somebody told me the other day, oh, you can't get rings from Hastings anymore. They've dropped MG ring. Just what people tell me. I'm not in the trade, so I don't do this all the time. Dick, what would you say about those piston rings?
I like Grant, I like Hastings. I do not care for the DV's oil ring arrangement. That's a really funky oil pack, and I just don't like that. So Grant rings. And Greg, to your question about where do you stop? Well, it's kind of like spelling banana. It's like B-A-N-A-N-A-N-A-N-A-N-A. It's quicksand. So I mean, if you're in there, like John says, you put a set of main bearings in, because a set of main bearings is what, $65 or something, and a set of rod bearings, well, you might as well put a set of rod shells in for $55 or whatever they are, and a set of rings is $75 or whatever a set of rings is, and then, well, you got it apart, you might as well send it ahead to the machine shop and get a valve job.
Well, I already did that. I had hardened valves put in.
But you know what? Then that makes it, in my mind, Greg, that makes it easy. If you just had the head done, then I absolutely would put rod bearings, main bearings, and rings in it for another $200 or less, and then you're done. Then everything is done.
On these engines, do you reuse the bolts? I'm just now getting used to these little British cars. I don't know much about them.
Yep.
Certainly, I would reuse the rod bolts. I would reuse the main bearing bolts. I would definitely reuse the cylinder head studs. Let me add this, by the way, real quick, because I know we're about out of time. The aftermarket replacement cylinder head studs for B cylinder engines are all awful. I would not install them for any amount of money. I have no problem reusing stock cylinder head studs and reusing them again. I would reuse the stock studs that came from the factory, or I'd use ARP studs for $150. I would not use the aftermarket studs because there are many reports of them breaking at very modest torque.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that the aftermarket ones, except for the ARP ones, are just like you said, crap. So
yeah, but I wouldn't hesitate. I wouldn't hesitate to reuse the originals. Wouldn't hesitate at all.
Yeah, the originals go in and out of the hole with no resistance to finger in and out, no problem.
Sure.
What about the stretching on them?
Well, if they're stretched, that's something else, but there hardly ever do you see stretching on a B cylinder head. T-type all the time, but not because the studs are so much softer. But the B ones, I don't think they stretch. I bet they break before they stretch.
I've never had one break.
You torque the heads down to 55 when you do them?
I go to 50. I torque, when I build a motor, I torque the head 5 times, actually. I torque it to 40 all around, 45 all around, 50 all around, 50 again, and 50 again. Just because I go to 50 and I tell folks, if you're going to retorque, then retorque to 52, because that will help overcome the stiction, the sticking friction. I'm not an advocate of loosening and then retightening. Other people are, and it works very well for them. So it's a matter of personal preference. I go to 50.
Okay.
Well, that answered one of my other questions is when you go to retorque after the 20-minute runtime, you loosen and retorque. So you're saying just put the torque wrench on it and go.
Just pull it down because it's all fresh. I'm an advocate of, you know, the car's been out in service for 38 years and 8 of the studs have got well, not 8, 7 of the studs have got rust and crud on them, and 4 of them are still underneath the valve cover washed in oil. So you can't put a socket on them and just start pulling. You can't do that because you're trying to overcome rust. So I'm a firm believer in the field with older engines, one at a time, not 2, not all of them, certainly just one at a time, and back it out, oil it so that each one of them has the same resistance to turn initially. You know, that's.
I would certainly not disagree with that with engines in the field. What I'm referring to are fresh engine.
And of course, these days we keep these things like they're precious gold. They're like your baby. You know, they never get dirty and rusty under the hood anymore. Again, right? This car will never be greasy again under the hood. So
I took an engine apart last summer. My daughter bought an MGB GT and her mother had one, so we got it all fixed up, teal blue, and it came with a rebuilt engine. And all the rings were broken. I don't know. I mean, it didn't look like it had been run. I don't know how do you break all those rings putting it together. And then it had bucket. It was an 18V engine, but it had some 18G engine stuff in it. So it had like it had 7 bucket lifters, the 2A 13 midget lifters in it, the short ones, and it had one big tall one, you know, with a shorter push rod. It was the most, oh my gosh, it was such a mess, you know. Now, you know, if the guy had actually run it, I mean, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. So you got to make something work, but oh my gosh, this is so trashy. I started over with another engine. I gave, because there's already board 60. It's just like, nah, that's it. So, well, it's 9:07, but I want to answer Ben's question, even though he's off, and that has to do with fuel sending units. And the new ones, if you look at an old MGB fuel sending unit, there's like 80 turns around a little mica or phenolic disc, and you get the new ones and there's 20 turns. I mean, come on, you know, one's going to work a whole lot better than the other. The thing that usually goes wrong with a fuel sending unit, 2 things go wrong. The float fails and it becomes a sink. You can get a new one of those. You just order that by itself. And the other thing is, if you take it apart, this resistor wire, which is about as thick as a human hair, and you can't solder to it, but it breaks. So you use a short piece of wire, and you make a loop in the wire and bend this resistor wire through it, and the solder will stick to the copper wire, and then you can put it to the post, and you can make it work again. And that goes back to this silly rule that I've got about anything original rebuilt is better than anything new. It's not always true, but anyway,
John,
Yeah.
one more thing on fuel sending units, and that is on the MGB fuel sending units, If you discover a bad float in your fuel tank sending unit, there's a really nice Ford brass float that's a direct plug-in, just snaps right into the float arm itself. And that, I don't have the part number offhand, but I can tell you that it's the same as fits a 1972 to 74 Ford Torino, and you can get it at your local Napa Auto Parts store for not a lot of money. So if you need to replace the float in the fuel tank sending unit with a nice brass one, just go to Napa and get one for a Ford Torino.
Really? Okay.
Yes. John, I'll send you the part number.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, let's see. Eric Van Note said he had a good one. Oh, here, Doc Rosevear, maybe, are you still on, Bill? Maybe not.
Yes,
They got-
I'm here.
Oh, okay, well, but you got a tornado warning there, right? So.
Not bad enough to,
Okay.
I'm still here.
All right, so anyway, Bill writes in and says, they don't have Castrol brake fluid. And what should I substitute? I would use just .4. That's just fine. You don't have to flush anything, just pour it in and bleed it out. So 100 years ago, back in the real early days, there was something going on about Lockheed or Girling brakes, and if you put the wrong brake fluid in, it would dissolve the cups. But that's ancient history. So .4 works fine. I don't know why I'm recommending .4 over .3. I don't know what the difference is, but not .5. That's silicone. That comes with its own host of problems and advantages. But .4 is the one you want to use.
A slightly higher boiling point in .4 than .3, biggest difference.
Okay. My friend Carl said, I wonder how soon I can get my MGB brakes to boil. So he's got a shop in the industrial part of Holland, Michigan. So he had a little test route where he took the car up to about pushing 60 miles an hour and laid on the brakes until the car came to a complete stop, did a full throttle acceleration until he hit 60 again, laid on the brakes until they stopped. He said it took 20 times before the brake pedal started to feel squishy. So nobody drives like it. I mean, street cars. But anyway, let's see. Okay, we got another one here. Dan Eastman, if you're still on, wonder if anyone has had experience pulling an MGB unibody. I have right front frame damage, and I don't want to scrap the body. So you've got, that's a whole world that I don't really understand, but you've got to find a shop that will put it on a rack and pull it. And they very well have got specs, but oh my gosh, all they want to do is insurance work, which means high profit work. And this is not high profit work. So I don't know what to tell you about that. Just
it's going to be an adventure. I think I'll have to find just the right pull shop. The body is in beautiful shape for a 79. It's remarkable. The prior owner, who's a friend of mine, put it into a ditch and hit the right front end, went into the ditch and twisted the subframe in the front. It's not really bad, but it's bad enough that you can't drive it. And just a shame to part that car out. And, it's one less marquee or one less body on the road, but I'm trying to see if I can fix it.
By the subframe, you don't mean the front cross member, because you can get another one of those easy.
No, it's the two little forks that stick out in the front, and they're bent. It's pretty obvious. So the question is, can they pull it back enough to get the subframe in and get the thing running? So I'm gonna shop around, see what I can find, but kind of a shame. So I'm hoping to save this one.
The T-type in the MGA workshop manual, back in section S, maybe for chassis, frame and chassis, they got pictures of 4x4s and porta powers, well, not porta powers, but little jacks, and they give you the clearances and what the measurements are supposed to be. But the MGB stuff, that I don't have any of that.
Well, there are specs in one of the operating manuals, and the specs are there. So I think I'm going to have to find just the right Michelangelo to fix this thing.
Yeah, just you got to have the old-fashioned way was chains on the floor and come-alongs and Bob's 3-pound hammer, you know, and you beat it until it goes straight. You know, it's heat it and beat it, and oh my gosh, it's a project. So.
Well, I'll
good
let you
luck.
know. Let you know what happens. Thanks for the
Okay.
advice.
All right, David Basili, I need my radiator on my 1980 MGB. I need to replace the radiator. Well, a lot of people have been putting in aluminum radiators, and everyone who's got an aluminum radiator says that it drops the temperature of the car because it's more efficient in getting rid of the heat. So if you can stand to not be original, I think aluminum radiators are probably the way to go. If you're gonna choice between a 2-column or a 3-column, I mean, get the 3-column. You know, just do it. But you've got to make sure that you've got a thermostat in the car that forces the engine to run at around 190 degrees. Because if you're running the engine too cold, then all the clearances aren't right. You're going to burn oil. You're going to have premature bearing wear. It's just like the human body. The car wants to run within a temp range. It doesn't want to run at 140, and it doesn't run very well at 260. So, but anywhere from about 190 to 212 or so, that's just a great range for it to run in. So,
John,
yeah.
aluminum radiator.
Yeah.
I got aluminum radiator on my car, and we went across the Mojave Desert 2019. It was 116 degrees, never left the end, the needle. I really like. Now my other car has the original 1971 radiator, and it works just fine, but I don't take that car in the desert.
Okay. Well, I was just out in Colorado Springs, and there were a whole lot of MGAs there from California, Arizona, New Mexico, and where it's hotter than it is here around the Great Lakes. And I saw a lot of aluminum radiators. I shudder because I like to see stuff original, but then on the other hand, you know, you put in there what works. And, you know, no one looks inside the engine and says, oh, look, you've got the adjustable timing gear. That's not original. You know, so what? You know, it just depends on where you're going on this. So, all right, Doug, what should the tire pressure be on my 54 TF? It has 15-inch 60-spoke painted wheels with 164 Vredesteins. Just offhand, I'd say 30 in the front, 32 in the back. If you read the workshop in the owner's handbook, they want those pressures down around, I don't know, what, 22 and 24. Those are bias ply tires that were made in 1954. So I don't know if Doug's still on there, but I put 30, 32 in all of the cars. And if you're not sure that that's happy for you, then set it down to 28. Take it up to 35, you know, just move it around some and go out and drive it and see where you like it. Some people like a little lower inflation. So.
Sorry, so this is Doug. John, I was going to say, John.
Hey, Doug, how you doing?
Yeah, with the conditions of the roads, they're not exactly smooth as a baby's bottom. So I'm just wondering if you know, a little overinflated 30 pounds minimum would be preferable to a little under 30 pounds. Or if the roads are so bad and the bumps, if a hard tire with a lot of pressure would, you know, I had a valve stem break on me going over bumpy roads. I guess it was a fluke of a thing, but it was at 30 pounds. So I'm just wondering, I have been running the 30 pounds on all 4 tires, and I'm just wondering, I mean,
that sounds about right. I can't imagine doing more or less damage. I guess you've got less pressure in the tire. The tire is going to flex more, you know, before you bend your A-arms, you know. And I know it's I thought your mayor there was going to fix the roads.
Well, this actually happened in downstate Illinois.
Oh, all right, okay.
On old Route 66.
Okay.
Fortunately, which Route 66 runs right along Interstate 55.
Yep.
And it's one of the most boring drives ever. But I'm glad it did not. I'm glad I was not on Interstate 55. And to change a flat on the interstate is bad. That's always scary.
Oh yeah. So
But,
Doug is our official counter. What count did you see tonight?
160.
160. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, John,
Yes.
I think to back up just a statement or so, I think the thing that you mentioned, and it went past quite quickly, I don't know if anybody else has an interest in it, but I never thought about what you said about the temperature relative to the operating temperature, relative to all the other parts in the engine around which that must have been one of the design factors when coming up with that, how the temperature of the engine manages all the other parts in the engine, their expansion, their contraction, and the way they interoperate with one another, just from a pure physics standpoint. I never, ever even thought about that, because we're always trying to make the engine run cooler. But with regard to the efficiency of running cooler has also its costs related to oil, viscosity, and everything else.
I had a customer call me up one time. He was driving across Ohio. This is probably 1980, 81, something or other. And he said he got into this terrific windstorm with, temperatures that were just unbelievably low. And he said his oil pressure gauge never came off cold all the way driving on the expressway across Ohio. And that trip cost him 2 quarts of oil to go a couple of 100 miles. He said, my car's never used oil. It's never used oil since. But that one time it was running so cold. And of course you need to enrich your mixture, the colder it is too. So you have to enrich the mixture when the carburetors are cold to get good vaporization. So yeah, it's the whole thing. It's just like the human body,
Yeah, the physics of it is really interesting.
And people say, well, should I adjust my valves hot or cold? I would say, well, adjust them hot, because you only care about what the clearance is when it's hot. You don't care about what the clearance is when it's cold. But I looked up the coefficient of steel, and you get a push rod that's called a foot long. It's not that long, but a foot long. And between 0 and 100 Celsius, that expands 1/10,000th of an inch. So you can't find that on a feeler gauge. So it doesn't make a difference, because Triumphs always want you to set the clearance cold, but I always do it hot. But anyway,
and you don't run it cold.
No, you don't. It doesn't run cold. No, it only runs when it's hot. So.
Thank you.
Hey, Jay, it's a pleasure. All right, let's see. Here we go. We'll get a couple more here. We'll push it to about 9:30. David Vasily, what if compression on cylinder number 2 is more than 10% from the others, and the others are very close together, and oil consumption is nil and fuel economy is good? Is there a need for a rebuild? I don't know. Dick, do you have to make a boat payment?
It depends on the absolute readings, I guess, more than the relativity. I mean, if the 3 are low and 1 is higher, well, it depends on how low or how high. So I don't think the relativity is the biggest factor there.
Well, yeah, I mean, if 3 of them are 80 and the other one's 145, yeah. But to have it so consistent, that's consistent failure is really unusual. So yeah. Let's see, Larry Sears, Moss sells a silicone gasket for the valve cover. What do you think compared to cork? Do you still use gasket compound? I use the cork gasket. I love the cork gaskets. What do you use, Dick?
I use cork. And also on that topic, the front tappet cover on the, certainly on the 18V engines and probably most of the earlier ones, the front tappet cover is the tappet cover that has the breather pipe that comes up and is routed depending on the year of your car. But those front tappet covers typically have the lower, if you take them off and look inside, the lower rear corner of the inside of the tappet cover is beveled. And that's almost always where they leak, because so many of the cork gaskets are not made right. They're just made too small. And when you try and fit them over the raised boss on the back side of the tappet cover, what happens is you're stretching them because they're too small, and the only place they can suck in is that corner where it's beveled. And so as a result, the gaskets, whether they're cork or rubber, they'll suck up into that corner. And it's real common for me to take a tappet cover off a core engine and find out that that gasket is not rectangular, but it's all sucked up into that corner. So I like the cork gaskets, and I like to adhere them with the right stuff to the tappet cover and not on the engine side. John?
Oh, I use the right stuff on both sides there. Absolutely. I think on my daughter's car, I think we couldn't get a gasket right then that fit. So I went to Napa and bought some sheet cork and just laid it out. I mean, it's just a rectangle. It's a pretty easy thing to cut. So made it really big so that it hung out on the sides, and yeah, it was real nice. All right, Doug Miller, talked to you last week regarding my B, trouble going into first and second, but reverse third and fourth is fine. It's in the shop for review, further review into the gearbox. But it got me wondering, is running the B at 3,500 RPM going to do any harm? I take her to the Adirondack Mountains and have to use the freeway for about 5 hours. That B engine will run all day long at 5,000 RPM. It's a durable, this is a durable, I don't know, Doug, if you're still on, but this is a durable engine, and it'll I mean, if it's built right, it'll do 5,000 all day long. I mean, you wouldn't choose to run it up there, I'm sure. My MGA, when I'm doing 4,500, I'm doing when I'm doing 5,500, I'm doing 90. So
I'm still on, John.
Oh, great. Okay.
What about the gearbox at that kind of RPM?
Oh, it's just fine. It's a sports car. It's a sports car. It's designed to, it's a, there's an orange place on the tach that's like caution, and then there's a red don't go. And again, you wouldn't run it all day at $5,000 maybe, because you don't need that need for speed. But no, they're designed to put out that kind of power and that kind of use.
Well, as we were trying to bird dog what this problem is with first and seconds, and you were helping on that too, I appreciate it. The question just kept coming out of us of what about this, what about that? So
sure.
There's some interesting information on the internet about the engine that's in the MGB in Great Britain and in a couple of other surrounding areas. That particular engine that's in Bs, the 5 main forward, that's used in taxi cabs and lorries and all kinds of other vehicles all over Great Britain. It's an extraordinarily versatile engine, and it can be modified and built to meet all those different requirements. It's an amazing engine.
About the only thing I've never seen it used in is above ground aeronautics. There's probably used stationary. The joke of it was about the X-Bag engines on the T-types. They didn't use them in the air, but they used them to run generators on the ground to, I don't know, start up Lancaster bombers or something or other. But yeah, the Sherpa van, and it was the same engine. This B series engine there's a relationship between BMC and Datsun that goes back for years. And so Datsun was building a B series engine, called it a J series engine, use it on high lows. So you can get J series engine parts. They're probably not current at all. But back in the day, when you couldn't get a rocker shaft from the MG dealer, you could go to the you go to the Datsun dealer and get a rocker shaft for a J series. It was the same thing, same dimensions. So
yeah, there's a very interesting, very long article available on the internet about the entire history of the 5-main MGB engine and how it was developed and how it's grown. It's a remarkable story to read.
yeah, it started off a little smaller. It was a little shorter, like in 1948, and then they popped it up. I don't know when. And our first introduction to it is in like a Wolseley 444 or something or other. That was Z-type magnets. They started getting it in 54, whereas the MGA, didn't come into MG sports car use until 1955. But it is Sherpa vans, everything. So. Okay, here's a different one. Dan S. Turn signal switch goes off within 2 seconds on my MGA. Online articles talk about rebuilding the switch using cardboard shims. Is it worth it or just buy a new switch from Moss? Oh, take it apart. You'll be amazed. That thing's got to have like 30 parts in it. It's real easy to put back together. I was talking to a guy today about taking apart his hazard light switch on his 1980 MGB. I said, do it in the kitchen on a white piece of paper when there's nobody else around, because everything can go upside down or reverse. Oh boy! But the switch in the MGA, yeah, oil helps. Neat's foot oil or motor oil helps too. And you can put a rubber band behind the leather seal in there. So there's lots of ways to go into that and fiddle with it. So that's about it. It's what's that, Judd?
I say it's just a lot of fun to do because it's such a simple thing. I mean, you talk about easy engineering. The switch and the T-type and the MGA. What do you got? 3 parts, maybe 3 parts plus a spring, and it's just take it apart, put a little oil in it, put it back together. There is an adjustment screw on the back that adjusts how rapidly the air is supposed to go either in or out. I forget.
You could soak the leather seal.
Yeah, but if you soak
and
the
it swells it.
Neat's foot or something like that, you've got a brand new switch. If you buy one from Moss, you don't know what the hell you got.
There's one problem with that switch you gotta be careful with. There's a little piece of cotton, like a little ball that's in the back. If you take that out, you're screwed.
Yep, that's the one that filters doesn't filter the air going in. It just controls it. And if you wad it up too tightly, no air gets through at all. So you turn it on and it stays there, or yeah. So anyway, that's a fun kind of thing to work with. Although the leather diaphragm, if it's torn, then there isn't much hope for it, and that's riveted onto a piece of plastic and so forth. But there are more pieces around. Well, look, it's 9:31, and I didn't get to anybody's. I mean, it says there's 11 more. Notes on here, and I'd love to get to them, but you're going to have to wait for another time. So I usually cut, during the session sometime, I usually stop someplace and make another plea for the pushing the PayPal button on my website, but it was so exciting tonight that I forgot all about it. So anyway, I do appreciate the support that everyone sends my way. I really do truly appreciate it. So I'll talk to Dick and we'll set up another time later on this summer. We can talk about performance parts and bumblebee wires and 40,000 volt ignition coils and all the stuff you don't need. And then Dick will tell you all the stuff that actually does work. So
the next session, John, in 2 weeks? 2 weeks for the next session, John, or what?
What's 2 weeks from? Let me look at the
27th of June.
27th. I'm going to be in Ottawa, Ontario on the 25th. Yeah, just offhand, I think so.
Because the
go
next
for it.
week is the 4th of July.
Yeah, so we can't do it then, and I'm gonna be in Dayton, Ohio for the mini meet. So, yeah, the 27th. That's, okay, Doug, we'll make that hard and fast. So.
Okay, thank you, John. Thanks for your
Okay.
time.
Well, and everybody, I'm just gonna open it up to gallery view now, so I can see everybody.
Thanks, John.
Say goodbye. So Bob and Gloria, thanks for being here. And Dick, thank you very, very much for coming in and talking. And Greg Fisher, you're still sitting inside the bonnet of your MGB. Jay, it's nice to see you. David Massey, nice to see you. Greg Glassner, I see him on. Dick and I did a practice run yesterday at 7 o'clock, and my email is always full of that. People log on at all different times. And anyway, Greg was on last night with us, and Dick had built Greg's engine. So I don't know whether I was going to ask to see if Norm Ewing was on tonight from South Africa. But because sometimes he tries to make it, but they have power shedding there, whatever that means. Sean, I see you there. This is I still have your engine. We're going to come down and build that, Sean, in I think probably October. I want to make a run down to DC, so we'll build that engine at your house in October, and then I'm going to continue on down to South Carolina, where I'm going to do the Gearbox seminar, and then I'm going to come back up through Atlanta, Georgia. So make that kind of a run. Want to remind everybody that the big MGB meet is coming up next week in Peterborough, Ontario. And then the exciting meet that I'm going to right after that, the weekend before Labor Day, is the Central Pennsylvania British Car Fest. What's that? Your 26th annual, Jim? What number are we working on? You got
28th.
28th. And I bet I've been to 15 of them, haven't I? I mean,
Easily.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
and we always
It's
do
always good to have you.
We always do a technical seminar at Jim's shop the 2 days before that meet. So we have a good time there. Barney Gaylord, see, he's on. He was on. I saw Barney at the GT47. So got a nice picture of Barney and myself and Bruce Woodson, who's an AMGAR tech guy, and
Bruce Woodson.
And Calvin Dodd was in the picture, and Paul Deershaw. So there, a lot of only person missing out of that picture was Cecilia from Scarborough Fair. So a lot of MGA knowledge here. Barney's got a 4,000 plus page website with all kinds of information on it. So it isn't just MGA, because the MGA engine and the MGB engine, except for a couple of main bearings and stuff, there isn't much difference. There's a slow evolution. So anyway, I just want to thank everybody for being on here tonight. And we'll look forward to our next one. If you want to get some information, you can send me an email about my engine building information that hasn't gone through Dick. So we didn't have too many. I thought maybe we'd have some professional disagreements tonight, but my 18,000's on the ring gap. Dick was suggesting 14 to 16, but again, it doesn't matter how big it gets. It only matters how small it gets. And I think that was about it as far as professionals. I thought we'd have more. So somehow, he uses the right stuff. I use the right stuff. Or ultra black. Forrest likes ultra black. So it's
We'll find something to fight about next time.
Okay.
Ultra black, we use that.
Yep. So, all right, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very kindly for a nice session tonight. It's been great. And may the tornadoes pass over your head. And wish me luck driving into Canada. It's always creepy when you got to go through the border. So anyway, till then.
Good night, John.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank you very much.
See you in Peterborough.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Dick. Good night, John.
Good night, John.
Yeah, thank Dick. He's the one that came on and spent so much time, so.
It was a
Great.
pleasure. Thank you all.
Good night, David. Good night, Chet.
Thank you.
And good night from Texaco.
Yeah. Okay.
Somebody's aging themselves.
Yeah, right.
Night,
Good
John.
night, John Boy.
Good night.